Hello and welcome to this coronavirus special. I'm Jack Norcross reporting from Reston, Virginia. With so many questions about the future of the university and questions about past decisions made, Elon News Network decided to take questions to Elon University President Connie Book. What you're about to see is the full, unedited interview of our conversation. Take a look. All right, well, Dr. Book, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here. It's good to have a moment of interaction in this virtual world that we're in right now.
Even if it's virtual, I understand that. I first want to ask you about how you are doing, and I know you have 2 kids and a mother. How are they doing during this pandemic?
Really good. I just talked to my daughter. This morning, she's starting exams. She's a law student at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and so she too went online and into remote instruction. And then my son in Atlanta, they were just called back to work this week, so he's transitioning back to work. But both have, I think, done a good job of weathering a lot of isolation and shelter in place. And my daughter foster cared for 2 cats during this last 2 months, and she said that really helped her weather the long days.
Good. That's good to hear. So take me back a little bit. I know that I want to know when the first time you really understood about the threat coronavirus could pose to the campus. I know that on February 14th, the university made the decision to suspend programs in China, and that was followed by the February 25th decision, obviously, to suspend the program in Florence. Can you just discuss a little bit about what was going through, what some of these early discussions looked like?
Yeah. Well, our first discussion about this was in January. We had a group traveling through China, a group of students that were on a winter term, and we had news of the Wuhan outbreak. And so we discussed that group specifically and their itinerary in China and their safety. And it's interesting now to look back, but during that meeting, we were hearing for the first time even the words coronavirus and talking about what is that. And I asked the senior team, my observation was, do you think this coronavirus is going to be a thing? Is this something that's going to turn into a thing? And, now in hindsight, looking back at that moment, if you remember, January was globally a really significant time. We had some interactions in Iran. I mean, it was just a lot of unrest in January. And when you have, 1,000 students, faculty, and staff out on winter term, tracking all these global events, think students. Fortunately, we have great leadership over in the Global Education Center. And then, like you said, what happened is in February, the travel restrictions came and we put those in place to China. And then later in February, we were in the middle of another discussion about the eruption of coronavirus in northern Italy. So not exactly in Florence, where our program was, but definitely in Italy. And there was a moment we were going back and forth, and of course, Florence, Italy is probably our most popular study abroad program that we have among students. And I finally, after a little bit of conversation, I asked the question, can you recommend to the students that they stay? So we had been talking about making a recommendation to leave, and then I asked it in the reverse. Can you make a recommendation that they stay? And when no one felt comfortable making that recommendation, then the decision was made that we needed to go. And it was really about the healthcare system in Italy being able to manage not only the Italians that were getting coronavirus in their care, but the additional students and the other international students in that healthcare system. And when it was clear that the capacity of the healthcare system would not be able to meet demand should it elevate as the graphs were showing, we knew we needed to get students home.
Were you surprised at all? Because the decision was made fairly early. There were very few universities at the time who had made that decision. And I remember Elon was all over CNN. You know, it made national news, the decision. Were you surprised at all about the national attention that it received at the time?
I understood. To be honest, people, we were just learning about the virus, and I actually received some criticism about pulling the trigger too soon at that time. And but when you looked at the downstream and started saying, okay, well, if these infection rates hold and people are sick, what unfolds? And inevitably, that's a healthcare issue. And you looked at hospital capacity; the numbers told the story. And so I felt really confident in the decision, and I feel really confident in the leadership of our team over in the Global Education Center. To assess. We've got really strong leadership there and understanding of the global climate. Elon is, number one in study abroad among colleges and universities. So I think we were out early, but we also were better equipped to make the decision. That we had more understanding of what things on the ground level could unfold. Should what happened, what was predicted happen, and then it did. And so within a week we knew exactly it made exactly the right decision.
And then
better safe than sorry.
Yes, no, for sure. And it was certainly a proactive decision, looking at certainly what developed. But on March 11th, it was then decided that this really was going to impact us here at Elon, and you made the decision to suspend in-class instruction for at least 2 weeks, those initial 2 weeks. What was with those initial 2 weeks? Were they really to buy time to figure out how this virus was going to progress? Did you think that there was a possibility that it could have been, all classes could have been pushed online at that point that you made the decision on March 11th?
We were watching a few other schools go online for the rest of the semester. Elon goes a little longer than other schools. So we really, I was thinking we're going to know more in 2 weeks. So really the decision was basically to buy some time to, okay, let's make a more informed decision. And I'm really a data-driven kind of decision maker, so I like to see what the data says. And actually had a message that went out when we made that decision, that to stay focused on the facts and not fear, because when you get afraid, you start making decisions that are not rooted in that factual information. And health is in good health, it can be a scary thing. And so it's especially important to make factually based decisions. And so we really look to the CDC's leadership, looked at the data, and as to be conditions where we can return. I think our original date of return was 2 weeks after spring break, and it was clear it's going to take a little longer. So for us to be able to fully understand the impact, so we pushed it out another weeks, and then it was clear to me that by the end of that, it still wouldn't. By then the governor and we were seeing the infection rates doubling and had a better sense of North Carolina. The other truth about the COVID virus is that every community, based on its geographical location, is really experiencing this virus differently. And we're in a suburban environment. We manage our own campus health care. And we have great hospital systems all around us. Schools that were in more rural areas that didn't have strong hospital systems to take in, even if you're at 1,200 students, imagine if 600 students are sick and the healthcare demands of that. So I was watching, universities make decisions based on their unique location and assets that they had on campus. So it became clear, though, that we would need to go online for the rest of the semester. So we really did it in steps based on the information that we had. Our goal is always to make informed decisions. And so I asked a lot of questions and I listened to different perspectives before making a decision like that.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into my next question, moving to kind of what's happening today. What is your typical day looking like now as you've transitioned? You're obviously not having as many in-person meetings. You're not on the road traveling, fundraising. It's pretty much base-oriented at this point. What are your days looking like?
There's a lot of this, a lot of virtual meetings. We still are making a lot of strategic decisions, and those need full participation by our community here on campus. One of the strengths of higher education is that we use a model of governance that's referred to as shared governance. So it really is a ground up effort. And what I've been so pleased about during our response to the emerging issues around the coronavirus is that each of our established systems have been working. Meaning, for example, that early in the switch to online, we knew that the challenges for students would be significant from continuing the normal grading policy. So we actually have an academic standing committee that looks at the grading policy on a regular basis. So that group considered the pass-fail option and made recommendation for that to the provost. And it's really, and that's one example of many ways that our shared governance is working, that we have expertise in each of these areas that the coronavirus is disrupting. And so it's great to have this informed community really tackle it and then, gather feedback and make recommendations. And I've been really impressed at how well our structures are working and allowing Elon to continue to use its shared governance model for academic decision making throughout. We also have a staff council that has representations from each of the units of staff, and that group has been a great sounding board as we look at working conditions and our preparations to return once the governor's shelter in place is lifted.
Yes. And I know we're meeting virtually, and classes are meeting virtually as well, as social distancing is still in effect and is likely to still be in effect for a while. There are, however, still people on campus, some with more flexibility than others, that and they are gathering groups. The Elon Police Department has had to issue some citations for these students who have decided to gather. I didn't know if you had a message for these students who are choosing to stay on or around campus during their time, and how they can try to help and really mitigate the issue within the larger Elon community.
Yeah, I think Vice President Dooley has done a really good job in his Monday communication. And I also spoke to the students in a video just about encouraging all of them to asking, not just encouraging, but asking all of them to return home. It is not even an issue of keeping yourself healthy, it's keeping others healthy. And so we really need to trust each other right now to do what's best for our community. And one of the ways we do that is following the policies and guidelines that keep us healthy. And so we have asked all students to abide by those. We're currently under a restriction of groups larger than 10. And that's where the citations were issued. We're gatherings larger than 10. So we have students that remain here for a variety of reasons and have off-campus apartments. And truth be told, for many of them, it's healthier for them to be here than in New York or in New Jersey, where the outbreaks are greater. And so I think that was the right choice to stay. And ask that as they stay, that they keep in mind the health of others, abide by the policies. And I will say, Jack, that the vast majority of Elon students are doing the right thing. And so I'm always hesitant to talk about the handful that may have gotten a citation. And I hope once they got that citation, they realized, oh yeah, I need to be more diligent and respectful of others during this time.
Sure, of course. Now, you've mentioned that the school has been committed to not laying off any faculty or student workers. You made that confirmation during the April 22nd meeting. I hope I didn't interrupt you. I'm sorry. There's a little bit of a little pixelation there. But as I was saying, you made the commitment to not, lay off or furlough any employees during this time. With that being said, the Elon, which Elon University has invested in through the endowment, we're earning scholarships, they have had to furlough layoff workers, as well as Aramark, part of the Elon dining system. Is there any way that the university is trying to support these two entities during the time to try to limit these layoffs and these furloughs?
Yes, we did, and I'll just give you a quick update on that, is the Charlestown, we worked with Charlestown, that is the operator of the hotel, and we're successful in the payment protection CARES Act funding. So they are recalling all of those employees. So that's good news. And that we just received news of that last week. So that process is beginning with Charlestown. The Aramark has a practice already of reduced workforce during the summer. We worked with them to keep the core employees working. And we still have people using our dining services and campus at a certain level. So we worked with them to keep that core group and intact through the end of the semester, and then they'll go to their normal summer operations, which is that operating at that reduced level until we come back in August. I call it the double whammy, and we've really been trying to avoid it, a double whammy of losing your job and fear for your health. And so I've been grateful for the prudent practices of the trustees that have allowed us enough reserve budgeting to be able to stabilize our employment here at Elon. And I'm grateful for the CARES Act and the swift response to be able to return the inn at Elon, and grateful for the leadership at Aramark in developing a plan and working with us to be able to preserve as much of that workforce as possible through the end of the semester.
In terms of the CARES Act that's helping the inn at Elon, so they're able to recall all of their workers, as far as you know, or just the ones that have been furloughed? Because I believe I also know that there were some employees that were laid off.
My understanding is that when you receive those funds, you agree to return all your workers, to take them off of unemployment. And you commit to doing that, and then if you do that and meet those criteria, the loan will then be forgiven.
Right. Okay, great. Now I want to move on to the task force. This is the task force that President Emeritus Leo Lambert will be heading. You've asked for the 22-person task force to come up with a decision by the end of May, but ultimately this will likely lie in your hands of making the final decision about what's happening. What are you looking for from this task force to bring to you?
So I'm going to talk about four efforts underway, because I just think it'll be helpful to put the task force in perspective.
Sure.
So I stood up the Emergency Operations Center. That was the first time we've done that in Elon's history. And they're now in day, I think it's 61, and they're still active. This is a core group of about 30 individuals who are cross-functional, and they are working to do the day-to-day decision-making about campus operations during this coronavirus. And they have been, the kudos to that team, because they have really been keeping Elon in good position throughout this. I also, our vice presidents meet immediately following the emergency operations team in order to have quick turn on decisions. And that has allowed for strong situational awareness, and that everybody on the team has a strong common operating picture of what's happening on campus. We call that COP. So that it's really important during a crisis to have good common operating picture, so everybody left and right knows what's happening. I've also worked with the chair of the Board of Trustees to have a smaller group of trustees that are meeting with us weekly, serving in advisory roles, sounding board ideas, keeping them very close because we are having to amend, for example, our budget for next year. We're having to work on changes to that. And we're having to respond to, look what's happening with athletics, and we had immediately the spring season went away. And just, these things are happening, and the trustees are great sounding boards for us and serving good guidance. We will have, I set up a working group for the return to campus immediately. So we have been in reduced work. Only a partial number of our essential employees are here on campus, basically just preserving a baseline of operations. And we imagine on May 11th that when the governor's order, if that all takes place, that Monday we can begin to resume campus operations at a higher level. And I've had a team of people working on those recommendations and plan to get those out next week. And then lastly, this work on returning to the fall, knowing that we're going to be here in the fall. Absolutely. I'm confident Elon is going to be open in the fall and we'll return to our residential model. It's how we do that I needed a task force working on. And I couldn't have picked a better leader than for that task force than former President Leo Lambert. And he has a great understanding of the cross-functional nature of all the units on campus. And so that group was formed and last week and has been already had several meetings. I've asked for those recommendations by the end of May with the goal of being able to communicate to students and our larger community a plan by early June about the protocols and policies that will be in place when we return in the fall. When I was in high school, I will say that we all read War and Peace. I don't know, Jack, if you've read War and Peace.
I have not, but maybe I should add it to my quarantine reading list.
So War and Peace, one of the, so Tolstoy's story of war. I'll never forget a general in the story. I was in high school when I read it, and one of the generals is talking about what are the great warriors are: patience and time. And so I find that to be especially true with the coronavirus, is that, the great warriors of patience and time are going to help us with the shelter in place. They're going to help us be patient as this virus and our ability to treat it and then vaccinate it, ourselves from it, unfolds. So I just say to all of the students, the great warriors are patience and you can absolutely feel that with the coronavirus.
Yeah. And this leads me, and you touched on this a little bit, that you're very confident that we are going to be back on campus in the fall. You're nearly guaranteeing it. But I think when people hear that, they assume that things are back to normal, that this is, same social life. These are the traditional classes. How should students be managing their expectations when it comes to this fall? What is being considered? What should students expect? Because I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's going to be la-di-da-di-da just like last fall.
Yeah, it will be different. And I'll say first and foremost, the health and safety of our community. And I think sometimes if you're a student, you think about it, about the population you're in of 18 to 22-year-olds, but then think about all your faculty who are in different age groups at different risk and may have underlying conditions. And so we have to take a holistic view of what a classroom setting will look like. And we're already looking at blueprints about how can you separate these desks 6 feet apart and creating classroom environments that fall within the CDC guidelines. We're thinking about events where we typically gather together in large groups. And for example, freshman convocation, that new student convocation that we have under the Oaks, and how will we be able to deliver that ceremony? So there's a lot of creativity thinking about each of these events, and I do think campus operations will look different. You may be wearing a mask when you're in certain settings. You may be asked to be tested for COVID. You may need to download tracing software on your phone so that in case you do have an infection, we can trace everyone else who needs to be tested or notified. And if you do get sick, where would you be housed? And how would food delivery and medical care be provided? So those are all the things that will look different this fall when we come back, because we will put health and safety first, and we will put teaching and learning as a priority. And so as you have those commitments, you hold to those commitments, and then you get creative. Like, how are we going to do that? And I have a lot of confidence that we're going to, and I'm already hearing a lot of creative solutions.
Well, I was just gonna ask. I mean, is there one creative solution that has stood out to you? I'm curious to know. I'm sure there's a lot on the table and a lot being considered, but I didn't know if there was one thing that was that really stuck out to you.
Well, one of the things that is about how we do food service. So Aramark has a team talking about touch-free food service and what that looks like, so that there's not a lot of handling and infection risk. Truth be told, I think, colleges, I had another college president tell me that colleges were like land-based cruise ships, that there can be a lot of exchange of, disease and infection. And I predict we will have a much healthier fall, generally. Because you think about all the sore throats and colds and all that get passed, because we already experienced a little of that when we prepared the campus for the mumps. If you remember, you probably noticed that suddenly there were hand sanitizers everywhere on campus as you came in and out of buildings. So as we started to provide mumps infection control, we actually reduced other health risks. And so our campus just ended up being a little healthier through the winter season last year because of all of that. So I do predict some upsides to these precautions, not just keeping us free from COVID, but also keeping us generally healthier.
And I'm sure a lot of these initiatives, it's costing to find out how much, and what is going to need to be done. But with that, it's projected that the school will need to maybe cut its budget between perhaps $45 to $90 million over the next 3 years. I'm curious to know, how are faculty and staff and students going to notice these budget cuts, and how are those cuts being taken into account, considering that it's going to cost more to, separate these desks, to prepare for this newly designed semester on campus in the fall?
Well, I had not heard that number, so that's interesting. So I will say that there are going to be costs because of mask and hand sanitizer. I mean, you can just imagine the cost of and thinking about food to go and how you do that. So we were fortunate that Elon received $1.4 million from the CARES Act to help cover the COVID costs. Personally, I think that it will probably exceed that by the time you do the manpower cost too. That's going to be needed to do the increased cleanings on campus and some of the other kinds of resources that make sure your facility is has the best options and healthcare options and food options. So you can think about it from just multiple perspectives. So I think that's great that we absolutely am grateful for the $1.4 million, but we are looking at additional costs. I will say the reason that we have to reset our budget is the room credit and refund process is a roughly $13 million issue for the university. Additional reimbursements with study abroad costs, like buying that plane ticket suddenly to come home, and room and board also for our study abroad programs, will probably get us closer to $15 million. That $15 million constitutes about 5% of the university's budget. So we will do some tightening of our belts to next year do that. I do, we're watching enrollment very closely, and that's how Elon's budget is generated, is through enrollment. We don't have a large Harvard-like endowment that would cover that. The reason that $15 million, so while we had the reserve to pay for it, the board also requires us to keep that reserve. So now the job is to pay back the reserve so that we can weather whatever next storm is ahead and unknown. So that's why we know we have a budget adjustment coming, even if the enrollment's there, because we're working to pay back that reserve.
And paying...
Elon,
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say, and replenishing that budget, you'd have to assume that part of the plans for the strategic plan, we mentioned the expansion, we mentioned the number of buildings that want to be added to campus. I have to assume that that is going to be delayed and pushed back given this pandemic.
Well, I already made a decision to suspend the renovations that were scheduled for this summer. That was about $6 million in renovations that were scheduled. So those hopefully will be able to happen next summer. So we pushed out the schedule for those. We have delayed the IQ1 and IQ2 financing until the markets are stable, until we're at least back into a more predictable economic outlook. I would hope that work could get picked back up this fall, though. Those two buildings are critically important to the future of Elon in terms of STEM investment. And you can imagine now it is so clear why, and we landed on it just right in that strategic plan, that we need to do more for those students and advance opportunities for students interested in STEM. The world needs more of the STEM graduates, and Elon wants to position itself to advance the great work of our faculty and students in those fields. So it's exactly the right strategic initiative, and I hope to get back to that work once things are stable. It'll be important for Elon's future.
Now, obviously, a big question as we're wrapping up the future portion. I think the biggest question among seniors, not only at Elon, but really across the country, whether you're a high school senior, you're in graduate school, you're in college, is graduation. And Elon's committed to holding an in-person graduation when that allots. I was curious to know what's the latest and what is the current plan for graduation at this point?
Well, we're modeling dates in the fall, and I just asked the committee to pause, that group that's working on it, because I really need to see what the governor of North Carolina is going to say about large gatherings of crowds. And so we'll know more early June about that. I really don't, what I don't want to happen for seniors is that we release a date and then we amend the date. I would rather just wait and see what's the governor saying, what are things like, how much confidence do we have in the dates we're modeling. So we will have an in-person graduation, and everybody will have a long lead time for planning, several months planning time. So it's the adage of patience and time. So I'm really trying to lean into, let's be patient and give this a little bit of time so that when we announce a date, people have a high reliability on it. And truth be told, I waited to do that about operations in the fall till I was 100% confident that we would be returning this fall. And I'm 100% confident based on all the data and the information we have, we're returning this fall.
Are there dates that you are I'm not saying that you need to commit to a date. Are the dates you are floating? I know hotel reservations, even with the Elon, but it's still, there's still a limited pool of hotels and resources in the Elon community. Are there dates you're considering? I've been hearing fall break as being considered as a time. No students are on campus, don't need to cancel school. Do you mind sharing us with what's some of the options that are being considered?
Yeah, I think that that list included. I do think it included fall break. I think it included homecoming weekend. They've got 4 or 5 dates on there that they're modeling, and they're all designed to support students who we know are working. Right, so one challenge we have is that the seniors are now all off working and they don't have a lot of vacation time in their jobs, right? They're all new employees. So we're modeling weekend scenarios that they could come in on a Friday night and at least have some of the traditional events with each other, the picnic. And we're talking about new traditions. I don't know if students are aware, but when the university burned in 1923, that's when they decided to have graduation under the oaks instead of inside the building. And so a great tradition was born out of that event. And so the committee is considering another great tradition that could be born out of the adversity of the pandemic, which I think is a great idea. Just imagine 100 years from now, think about how much we talk about the fire of 1923 as really part of Elon's DNA and about our spirit of resilience and cooperation and steadfastness. And so just imagine 100 years from now, people will be talking about the response to the coronavirus and what it said about our community. And I know that some of those messages will be how powerful relationships are, how much Elon leveraged relationships to ensure continuity and completion and on-time graduation and how much that sense of community helped people weather the isolation that we're all experiencing. And so I'm really proud of the community's response and the creativity and the ways that we're staying engaged, and enormously grateful for technology and other tools that Elon has invested in over the years that have allowed us to continue our operation.
My final question on graduation is May 22nd, I believe, was the date of graduation was supposed to be. Is there any type of virtual ceremony or anything planned on that date to kind of help and instead of just, receiving your diploma in the mail?
That's right. We are planning an online virtual kind of conferral of degrees for that day. In part, students have earned that degree, right? And so many of them need that degree in hand for their employment. And it's predicated on, the college degree. And so we want to acknowledge and have a day that we can all feel at least a sense of connection with each other for that achievement. So we are planning a conferral. I don't want it to replace the online. I don't want the online to replace the face-to-face. So we're trying to design it in a meaningful way, but not in a replacement way. Because truth be told, it's the same thing with our classes. As great as they are, they don't replace the kind of interactions we were having when we were all together face-to-face. But we need the online right now, and we're going to make the best of it. And so we're imagining at least a little bit of ceremony and messaging that reminds us about the achievement we've had and how much we mean to each other.
Great. And our final few questions here. I'm just curious about what you've learned. This was touched a little bit on during the student down hall. What you've learned as a leader, as a president of a university during this time, and what you think the university has learned moving forward about and during this pandemic.
I'm going to answer that 2 ways. I did, in the middle of a very heated day last month, I said to the team, let's all pause for just a second. And I want to go around the room. Tell me what you're learning. What are we learning about Elon? What are we learning about our organization? And that was a really powerful conversation because in the middle of all of this, you learn what is essential, right? You learn, okay, we can't live without this. We have to replicate this virtually. And you learn about leadership, about, about how you embrace change and look to the horizon about what's next. And, I've really been focused as a leader on helping people see the horizon. We're going to get through this, and this is the horizon is coming. And I want everybody to shift their attention to our ability to create that horizon. Imagine the next semester. And to be honest, Jack, I'm already focused on fall 21 as well, because we've had a lot of disruption in our high schools, and normally your juniors would have spent the spring coming to visit colleges, and that didn't happen across the country. So already imagining, okay, for those juniors and rising seniors in high school, what are we doing? So getting people to lift up and look out has been one of the things as a leader I've been focused on, and to know what our strengths are. And Elon has a long history of being an effective planner, that we spend our energy making plans and then executing those plans. So that's why this fall task force is so critical, is that we will do what we plan to do and we'll do it well. And so let's get busy creating a plan. And I've been really pleased at the progress of all of the groups that are working on Elon's future and keeping them heads up and focused on a strong arrival in the fall and then a strong future for Elon.
I know that a lot of tough decisions have had to be made during this time. Has there been one that has stuck out to you about the toughest decision throughout the coronavirus that's really kind of stuck out with you, and you were maybe most concerned with the outcome, or we're really debating two ideals? What was the toughest decision for you?
Well, I think that early decision about Italy was telling, and I think as a leader, most of my work is about asking questions that help us get to the decision. So just asking that question, well, can you recommend that they stay? and then when people couldn't do that you're like, okay, well, that we need to go then. And so I remember that as being the moment when I knew things had changed, that was a big decision, and it was going to affect our future decisions, because I couldn't do one thing in Italy and do something different in another CDC country that was elevated like Italy. So I knew we were setting a standard at that point based on those CDC alerts. And so that sticks out in my mind. I also have had a couple of times where I thought, part of, and this is true for everyone, you're trying to anticipate the country, not just what's happening on at your organization, but the country and the world. And so yesterday's news about the vaccine out of Oxford, and so we're all really hopeful. And each time that information comes out, you go, okay, well, what would it look like if we're all here and in September there is a vaccine? So we're impacted by what's happening around the globe, what's happening here in the United States, the governor of North Carolina, and the decisions they make. So each of those decisions have a ripple effect, and you see yourself as an institution against those decisions. And so it keeps you, busy, right? So we're in day 64, something like that, of emergency operations, and so each of those days, there are variables you can't control, but it impact you, and you have to be able to make decisions.
I have two more questions for you. I know we're coming up on 45 minutes here, but speaking of days, 64th day, today is by our calculations, your 791st day as president of Elon University. And I don't know if that seems like an eternity, or if it seems like just was yesterday that you started on March 1st. But a lot has happened, I think it would be fair to say, during your short tenure. I mean, you think about it, we've had hurricanes, we've had the mumps recently, you've had to deal with the faculty union. I'm just kind of curious to know about your reflections of this, if you think this is kind of some negative new president omen or something, or kind of what's been happening through your mind as you've really just taken this job on, whereas I don't know if Leo Lambert could say he really endured the same during his 20-plus year career as president.
Okay, Jack, I will say that is true, all those things on that list, but I also have this other list of all the great things that have happened for Elon. We, for the first time, were ranked as a national university. We're coming in at number 84. We've raised $190 million as part of the campaign, the Elon Leads campaign. And I've probably added another 50 Odyssey scholarships to the books. And so in my head, I have another list in addition to that list that has all these great things going on at Elon. Really excited about engineering, about nursing, which is just around the corner for Elon as well. And it is both lists. I will say that when I was just coming into the job, I went to a workshop for new presidents. And at that workshop, they asked us to make a list of things we thought would happen. And my list was all positive things. And I was looking at that list the other day, and many of those things have happened, but we've also had other things. And it's not so much that they're negative, that they're challenging, right? That they require us to think about Elon's future. They require me to engage with lots of conversation and constituencies so that we can make good decisions. So it's not even, hurricanes and mumps or faculty unions. They're not necessarily negative things. They're all just things that happen. And then you try to have, you work hard to make good decisions and conversation and transparency with the community.
My final question to you is, we're all kind of quarantined, we're all at home, we're all finding new hobbies, new activities to do. I want to know what you're doing during this time. I know you're typically early bird, so I want to know if you're still getting up early, reading any great books, watching any good Netflix series. What's going on?
I did. I'm watching Spoils War on which is a BBC production. That I think the last episode was like in 2009. So it's an old show, but it's got this very quiet energy to it. So in the evening, I have to tell you, I'm on screen so much during the day that when I get home, I have kind of had a moratorium on screen time. And so I'm reading like real books and to help myself detach. I still am getting up early. I think structure, especially during this quarantine. And I've really been thinking about the students because it's getting more challenging for me. I don't know about for you, but as it gets longer, it's been harder. And so I've really relied on getting up. I take a walk. I try to, I call my mom, check in on her. She's been in isolation now for 2 months, and I'm worried about her. And so I think those routines are good. And I hang in there is really what my message to the students, especially during exams. You really want to take good care of yourself in these next 2-3 weeks as we end the semester. This is going to end soon, so keep on the horizon, a walk on the beach or a hike in the mountains, because it's coming. those are coming back, and hang in there.
Our thanks to President Book for sitting down and doing an interview with us. That's all we have for this coronavirus special. For more on the coronavirus and everything else happening on Elon's campus, visit our website, elonnewsnetwork.com, and be sure to follow us on social media at Elon News Network. For now, I'm Jack Norcross reporting from Reston, Virginia. We'll see you soon.